In Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, the book appropriately ends with a joke. See, there were these two guys in an asylum. They both plan out an escape and manage to get to the roof in their attempt. But the problem is they have to overcome a gap in between the buildings to be truly free. The first guy jumps over just fine, but the second guy won't do it. The first says to the other, "Hey, why don't I shine a flashlight over the gap? That'll create a light bridge and you can cross the gap." The second says, "What do you think I am, crazy? That'll never work. You'll just turn it off when I'm halfway across." As the book ends, Batman and the Joker share a moment of lucidity about their situation and the crazy little game they play. And yet, in this extreme world where good and evil are personified in such counterintuitive archetypes, perhaps their battle is a never-ending stalemate because the rules aren't the same. That's part of the brilliance that is The Dark Knight. Behind all the philosophical ideas, the crime drama that unfolds, the action spectacle, and the fall of a hero, there are two nut jobs battling against each other. One comes from the shadows and will cross many lines except killing. The other dances like the lines don't even exist and makes his schemes public. The Clown Prince of Crime is clearly the villain, but the Guardian of Gotham isn't truly a hero here because he can't beat the Joker using the conventional rules of a hero. That's because the Joker isn't a conventional villain with rules and desires. He wants to watch the world burn and prove that all humans are slaves to their baser nature. Living by rules is madness and a convenience masking the ugliness of society. So in order to win, Batman must break the rules. He moves past the boundaries of conventional heroes and becomes a symbol, one that can take on different meanings at different times. For a fallen and perverted world, Batman's original goal of being a more noble hero is madness. By the end, he reaffirms that it's not faith in a mortal, flawed man, but in an everlasting and incorruptible symbol that will bring humanity out of the darkness. I was born in 1993, and my mom had an aversion to Tim Burton films, thus I didn't see my first Batman film until Batman Begins in theaters. I feel it's important to acknowledge this so you know where I'm coming from as a Batman fan. It wasn't Burton's more fanciful artistic take, nor the animated series' sincere translation of the comics, nor the brilliant satirization of superheroes and society of Adam West, but Christopher Nolan's heightened reality that got me into Batman. That doesn't mean it's my favorite version of the character and that I'm blind to how hyperbolically insane the praise for the trilogy and this film in particular got. But it does mean it's the keystone to what got me to look at comics and superheroes with a more critical eye, and why I still don't believe they are exclusively for children and adolescents. After the success of Batman Begins, a sequel was prioritized. Christopher Nolan had no concrete plans for a follow-up, though he was open to the idea after finishing production on The Prestige. Meeting with both his brother Jonathan Nolan and David Goyer, the team put together a story dealing with the fallout of Batman's war on crime and how evil may make an unexpected countermove to survive. For the team, the Joker was the clear choice for a main villain to tackle, as well as bringing in Harvey Dent to contrast. In fact, Dent was considered for the first film, but was ultimately left out because the team didn't think they could do him justice yet. In terms of casting, Heath Ledger was the only serious consideration from Christopher, especially after talking to Ledger about his ideas for how to adapt the Joker in the more grounded world of Batman Begins. Aaron Eckhart was cast as Harvey after impressing the Nolans with his work in Thank You for Smoking. While most of the rest of the cast and crew from Begins would return, Katie Holmes would not, opting instead to do Mad Money. She was replaced with Maggie Gyllenhaal, a noted indie film actress whose brother Jake had just worked with Ledger on Brokeback Mountain. The sequel was given the title of The Dark Knight and was subject to an intense amount of scrutiny and hype, thanks in no small part to a well-executed marketing campaign. The movie's anticipation was further heightened after Heath Ledger passed away in an unfortunate accidental overdose. Box office projections were healthy for the film, though I think it's fair to say everyone was caught off guard when it was released. Reviews were almost universally positive, with significant highlighting of Ledger's performance. Box office records were shattered, including becoming the fastest film at the time to pass the $500 million mark domestically. Coupled with the release of Iron Man that same summer, comic book films started to be taken seriously as valid places to tell legitimate, thought-provoking stories with layered characters, with more at its core than just a villain being beat up by a hero. This, of course, brought on the deluge of superhero films that is still with us to this day. This impact extended to film awards as well. Ledger was posthumously awarded an Oscar for his performance, the first ever for a comic book film. But the upset created by this film not being nominated for Best Picture led to the Academy increasing the number of nominated films the next year. Though it's more likely that The Dark Knight was the final straw in a long-running debate about how the Academy often snubs more popular, high-performing films. With the size of the impact of this film, talking about how it influenced me feels like a minor footnote in comparison. Be that as it may, The Dark Knight, together with the subsequent release of the video game Arkham Asylum the following year, cemented me as a devoted fan of the character, going out of my way to read most of his comics, watch most of his films both live action and animated, and eventually playing a part in my choice of studying film design in college. A year after Batman's emergence, Gotham is looking better than ever. The city is fighting back against the crime lords that held it captive for so long, and the rise of the new DA, Harvey Dent, seems to herald a bright new future. Batman, Harvey, and Jim Gordon, the head of the Major Crimes Unit, form a pact to take down the mob by cutting off their funds and going after their accountant, putting a true dent in the criminal underworld. In an act of desperation, the crumbling mob turns to a man known only as the Joker, who proposes going after Batman. In reality, the Joker knows the mob's time is done and that they're an outdated, rigid version of evil. He instead demonstrates that adaptability is the key to survival. In other words, Batman must be beaten on his own level in order to win the battle for Gotham's soul. The Joker's reign of terror is so ruthless and successful that the city resorts to fear and rejects their watchful guardian. With his world seeming to renounce him, Batman struggles with the choice of fighting a fight that might go on forever or surrendering to an unstoppable agent of chaos before the whole of Gotham burns. There have been so many reviews of this film praising it to the high heaven that I wondered for a long time if there was any point to my contribution here. However, two things influenced my decision. First, if I planned to review each of my favorite films in turn, this would naturally come up. And second, I've been aware of a growing backlash to the Nolan Batman films in recent years, with a lot of younger folks claiming that the film's only redeeming value is Heath Ledger. While I wish no ill will towards anyone who doesn't like this film, and I certainly champion speaking your mind regardless of the majority's view, I must respectfully and wholeheartedly disagree. Heath is the MVP of the movie, yet I firmly believe that even without an Oscar-winning performance, this would still be seen as a bright light in cinema. The film tackles a lot of themes such as escalation, duality, who people truly are when pushed to the brink, anarchy, vigilance and courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and the value of symbols. It's an entertaining action film. It's an intense crime drama. It's a meditation on endurance in the face of madness and chaos that sweeps our world. And let's not forget, it plays true to everything Batman stories are most often about while presenting it in a unique variation. And that's the secret to this movie's success. It's a tightly woven piece that wears so many hats at once. It is perhaps a bit overstuffed, and I'd be lying if I said this film doesn't tend to leave one exhausted, but it's not in the same way as something like Dawn of Justice, where the ambition at play and desire to introduce so much foundational work for a cinematic universe gets in the way of a simple and profound philosophical argument. The Dark Knight finds a way to serve all masters without overstaying its welcome. This complex machine is centered around four main characters: Batman, the Joker, Harvey Dent, and Jim Gordon. Each contributes beautifully to the story at play and helps to blend all these ideas into a cohesive whole, making the movie something that can be enjoyed on multiple levels. And that's a characteristic I think is essential to making a film stand the test of time. The movie was obviously made at a specific point in history, and there will be elements that are more indicative of that one time period, such as the issue of mass surveillance without consent. But if I can enjoy the movie just as much now as I did in 2008, when I was at a very different stage of my life, that's a rare and special kind of power. As a sequel to Batman Begins, the film is excellent. That movie was a character study of Bruce Wayne and an examination of fear as a motivator. Bruce, motivated by the darkest moment of his life, pondered how criminals could hold that kind of godlike power to change lives, and eventually set off to understand the criminal mind. Ra's al Ghul taught him that fear was the mask criminals wear and is a tool to accomplish your goals. While Bruce ultimately didn't agree with the League of Shadows' methods, he did take the gifts and knowledge he received from them and started to use them against the criminals and the corrupt, striking fear into their hearts. He basically played the mobs at their own game and upped the ante. donning the guise of a dramatic example that couldn't be ignored to bring evil into the light and shake the good people of Gotham out of apathy. The Dark Knight is all about the response from the people to this emergence. On the one hand, you have Harvey Dent, a man who believes in justice. He recognizes that Batman is a result of the broken system of law enforcement, but is cognizant of what the Batman represents and what he's trying to achieve. He understands that Batman is working to make a world that no longer needs a dark vigilante like him. Dent knows his own work is essential towards that goal, and so he considers the outlaw an ally. He's not naive about the difficulty of the work, even admitting to the mayor that his RICO case against the mob isn't going to bring lasting change on its own, but it's about giving them as much of a clean slate as possible to repair their city. Above all, Dent is what Bruce Wayne hoped would happen from Batman's actions. A good person moved towards lasting action and who will not be intimidated by fear of the organized mob. On the other hand, you have the Joker, a man who understands Batman's influence better than anyone. He correctly surmises that Dent isn't the problem, but that it's Batman who's driving this war. The reason the Batman is winning against the mobs is because they refuse to acknowledge his arrival as changing the rules of the game. This isn't a game that can be won by traditional means. So much like in a game of poker, the established rules of play can be thrown out with the arrival of a wild card. The Joker's plan may seem convoluted, and it certainly is, but I believe the Joker is working several schemes to try to make his point, which is the only sensible way to live in this world is without rules, and he's perfectly happy to die at any moment to prove it. Each person trying to be a hero is living by an internal code that governs them, but the truth is that we're all animals. Our attempts to control things are pathetic because your rules cannot account for every possibility. What if people become so terrified that Batman has to turn himself in a vain hope to appease a madman? What if the city of Gotham demonstrates that they are not capable of the good Batman believes in, giving in to their own fear and killing someone else to survive? And finally, what if we take the noblest of the three heroes, Harvey Dent, and bring him down to the level of a villain? It's madness to try to anticipate the next move of evil, because life will inevitably throw out a chance card. In this case, the Joker, a wild card who uses fear to motivate people to give in to their darkest impulses. Thus, Bruce Wayne struggles because he has oversimplified the criminal mindset. He believes they all want something logical like money or power. The story Alfred tells him is meant to get him to understand that the Joker is the rare breed of creature that doesn't operate on logic. The theme of escalation is apparent. If you fight evil, it's going to fight back and perhaps even outmatch you. The Joker uses the very same emotion Bruce hoped to use, fear, in order to motivate people. So to beat the Joker, Batman has to think outside the box. He uses the tool of surveillance against the innocent to find the Joker. He unwittingly chooses for someone to die in the Joker's sadistic game of choice. He subdues Harvey Dent permanently to protect Gordon's son. And finally, Batman becomes the villain for a time in order for people to continue to have a belief in good, and which will lead into building something positive. This decision is foreshadowed several times by characters in the film with the repeated line, "He's not being a hero." The continuing thought from that is that he's a symbol, and symbols have a longer lifespan and lasting impact than a mortal hero. Towards the beginning of the movie, Bruce is looking forward to the end of his battle against the criminal underworld and the life he gets to have afterwards. I love this idea partly because I feel this is a more natural way to incorporate the repeated idea with several superhero sequels, like Superman 2, Spider-Man 2, and even Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. When have I sacrificed enough? He looks to Rachel as his hope for a normal life. Upon her death, Bruce has a crisis of conscience since the future he longed for is no more. This scene, by the way, beautifully resembles the visuals and setup of the scene in Batman Begins with Alfred and young Bruce after his parents' funeral. And by even using the same music, we understand how impactful Rachel's death is to him. The full fallout of this event won't be dealt with until the next film. But for now, Bruce starts to learn the same lesson that both Clark and Peter learned. The natural desires of one man must play second fiddle to the holier cause. Batman is destined to be a forever idea, and the time is not yet right for Bruce to put aside the mantle. And because he has no superpowers like those other two, there will be a time for him to step aside and let someone else take his place, but it's not now. Part of the reason I love the Dark Knight trilogy is that it's the story of Bruce Wayne and his creation of a symbol. The focus is less on the superhero as a character unto himself, an angle I would say Matt Reeves is focusing on with his films, and more about how the idea of Batman changes the world forever. And as the second act, this movie understands that the natural course of stories is to take them darker. You need to put the hero in the worst possible situation imaginable, unique to them, and then the third act is where they get out of the pit you dug for them. This film creates the ultimate antagonist for Batman in the Joker, the one villain who he can't defeat in a traditional manner. I know some people who don't care for this film point to the Joker as part of the problem. This film's depiction pretty much relegates the monster to a terrorist, a label we're all too familiar with these days. In so doing, it robs some of the allure the Joker has for being an uncomfortably funny monster who is almost supernaturally evil, a true supervillain with no real-world equivalent. Morphing him into something more recognizable is watering him down. I think the larger issue is that in grounding Batman in his world like this and not allowing the characters to be the larger-than-life versions they were in the comics makes the whole idea of doing Batman on film less special. If Batman isn't any different psychologically or visually from something like Rambo or Blade Runner, then why do superheroes at all? I can get that, but I'm personally fine with it here because A, parables like this are meant to help us liken the situation to ourselves and learn inner truths, and sometimes that may require removing fantastic obstacles like acid bleaching the skin of a villain. B, this isn't the definitive final word on the character, and there's no reason that we can't have the more fantastic interpretations on screen later. C, the Joker has always been a terrorist and Batman has always been a vigilante. We just weren't as familiar with the labels back in the 1930s and 40s when these characters were introduced. And D, the core idea of what makes Batman Batman and the Joker is very much intact in this reinterpretation. As the Joker says, you and I are destined to do this forever. Even if the Joker and Batman never fight again on screen in this trilogy, the ideas behind the principled hero and the chaotic villain will forever clash, even if the incarnations change. Speaking of the Joker, there's nothing I can say about Ledger's performance that hasn't already been said. So I'll borrow a phrase from Geekvolution's Captain Logan. Whenever he's on screen, Ledger is printing cinematic gold. It's all terrific and iconic without wasting a second of screen time. It's masterful. And I too believe the direction of The Dark Knight Rises would have been different if Ledger were still alive and available at the time. As a side note, the multiple choice origin of the character from the comics is incorporated in an intelligent way here. We are given two plausible stories as to how he got his scars, and we're led to believe neither of them is true. The Joker is also presented as a fully formed character that needs no development or growth to become evil incarnate, which is exactly how the Joker is presented in Batman #1, the debut issue of the character. In talking about Batman and the Joker, I've been neglecting Harvey Dent, and I think a lot of critics do as well. There's so much to talk about with this film that Harvey gets sidelined, and that's a shame because the movie doesn't treat him as such. In a way, you can view The Dark Knight as the story of Harvey Dent because both Batman's and the Joker's actions are centered on him. Dent represents the more noble ideas of law enforcement at the start and then falls to the Joker's level by the end. When Rachel dies due to a choice made by others, Harvey breaks. The seeming randomness of things he couldn't control led to his disfigurement and the end of his bright future with his love. So the Joker convinces him that chaos and chance are fair because they cannot be influenced or manipulated by outside forces. And given that the institutions that Harvey gave so much to has failed to prevent such tragedies, Dent now believes it is futile trying to impose sense on a world ruled by randomness. We cannot be decent men in an indecent time, and the only morality in this world is chance. Unbiased, unprejudiced, and fair. As I talked about in a previous video, this is what I believe motivates the best versions of Two-Face. Not that he's so paralyzed by indecision that he needs the coin, it's that the coin is the ultimate judge of fate, and so Two-Face uses it to decide what happens to his victims. Aaron Eckhart does a fantastic job making us understand and care enough about Dent to be invested in his survival in the story. Harvey is the reason the film can be seen as a tragic one, and it takes an actor of considerable skill to make an audience forget for just a moment that he is destined to become Two-Face, despite all the foreshadowing in the film, like the nickname, the fact that half of Dent's office is cluttered, the lighting on his face at times, the shot where half the cops applaud Dent for his turning himself in, and the address of 250 52nd Street. This film uses the ideas of reflections and two sides of the same coin quite a bit without ever spelling it out in dialogue, even down to the film's title. The Joker and Batman being reflections of each other is ground well trodden on in other media, and this film certainly does it as well. But it draws equal attention and focus to Harvey and Bruce and their status as knights for the city. In a similar way to how Harvey was influenced by Batman, Batman takes inspiration from Harvey. He reuses the now famous line of, "You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain," just before echoing a move that Harvey made earlier. When Harvey turned himself in as the Batman, he allowed himself to be seen as the villain by the public to give the true hero a chance to take the villain down. And in the end, Batman does the same thing to preserve Dent's image long enough for the city to recover from the fallout of Joker's reign of chaos. This film, along with the animated series, is the main reason Harvey is one of my favorite Batman villains. Gary Oldman is always a benefit to a movie, and he does an amazing job with Jim Gordon. An honorable cop who lives in a compromised world and does what he must without losing sight of the end goal. He's the lawful version of Batman, the less than shiny, noble protector of the innocent. In Batman Begins, he is surrounded by bent cops. In this film, he uses some of the same bent cops. Yet he doesn't desert his post because I do the best I can with what I have. Without those corrupt cops, Gordon doesn't have the manpower to do his job. It's fundamentally wrong, especially for a political idealist, and yet Gordon will not abandon the fight because he is stifled. Of the major characters, Gordon is the only one who isn't seen or portrayed as giving in to his darker impulses or becoming the villain at any point. While he does perpetuate the final lie about Dent, it's not his idea and he resists it. He remains the most noble throughout and is the most relatable of the four major characters. This extra wrinkle of making lemonade out of lemons cements that status for him in my eyes. In fact, almost all the movie's players do a fantastic job, from the ever-reliable allies of Michael Caine and Morgan Freeman, to the gangsters played by Eric Roberts and Richie Koster, to the Gotham cops, which includes Monique Gabriella Kernan and Keith Zarabaika, who voices Harbinger in Mass Effect 2, and even wonderful side players like Nestor Campbell and Anthony Michael Hall. The one I have the hardest time with is Maggie Gyllenhaal. Not so much because I dislike her performance or her character's role in the story, but because I have a hard time reconciling her as the same character from Begins played by Katie Holmes. Part of it is because they look fairly different, but it is more so that Gyllenhaal is giving such a different performance to Holmes. Yes, Holmes was one of the most criticized aspects in Begins, and I can understand wanting to smooth out the rough edges, but I think it's more important to be consistent within your universe. And I think there's a way to deliver on the ideas that Holmes was working with while still serving the story's needs. The production of this film, like all of Nolan's films, is top-notch. From the dream team of Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard delivering one of my favorite superhero scores precisely because it's not trying to accomplish the same thing as most of the others, to the stunt and special effects teams delivering on their craft. But the biggest heroes here are cinematographer Wally Pfister and sound designer Richard King. Pfister tackles a grand challenge in incorporating IMAX cameras into the cinematic language of the film, and it's a stunner. It was instrumental in proving the viability of the IMAX format in narrative filmmaking, not only using it for establishing shots, but also in key action scenes. If you've never seen this film on the big screen, I strongly recommend keeping an eye out for a re-release. It'll help you appreciate what Nolan is doing in pushing filmmaking forward. I also mentioned Richard King here, not just because he helped the film win its only other Oscar, but for giving us an action sequence that beautifully demonstrates the power of sound design in a narrative medium. Ever notice the truck chase has only 3 instances of music, and each just to punctuate the shifting in gears and evolving the sequence? The rest of it uses sound alone. Each sound plays a melodic line like in music, and each works not just to give a distinct sound to the image, but to give life to the sequence and acoustically represent the character battle underneath the visuals, namely the Joker's hunt for Harvey, the police barely staying ahead of him, and Batman's interference. It's one of the most effective scenes I've ever seen without actual music. In case you're curious, it's widely believed that Like a Dog Chasing Cars on the soundtrack was supposed to be the underscore to the scene, and there are YouTube videos placing the music back in. Even if you forgive the rather rudimentary mixing in of some of them, it's clear the scene works so much better without the music. A lot of people will talk about The Dark Knight at length as a think piece, but few seem to acknowledge its action elements as well, and some of it is downright spectacular. This film has your standard issue 4 or 5 big sequences. To me, they never overshadow the story and are just thrilling in their own right. The bank heist is one of the best openings to a film ever. The Hong Kong scene is the most James Bond-like of the film, right down to the skyhook which was popularized in Thunderball, and yet has enough flares to make it feel like a Batman sequence. The finale in the Pruitt building is also classic Batman, using gadgets and avoiding any casualties. But the showstopper is the truck chase. This movie has a lot of explosions, guns, and fistfights, but no action image was more memorable to me than seeing a truck flip end over end and knowing it was done practically. Just wow. Let's get into some more criticisms, because even a towering achievement like this will have a few things that won't work with everyone. The scene with Fox and Batman over the sonar computer is quite heavy-handed. Batman has tried everything to find the Joker, and because the film is about Batman crossing every line short of killing, it would make sense that he would go to this extreme. I'm glad Fox doesn't take this lightly and threatens to resign, but it still feels like the scene is hammering in how wrong the act is, with only a mention that Batman doesn't really have any other presentable options for how to find the Joker. It feels a little one-sided, and while I'm glad Batman is only planning on using this once and has a way for Fox to destroy it afterwards, it's the one part where the movie feels a bit preachy, even if I agree with it. In a film that tends to leave the morality of the character's actions up to the viewer, particularly in regards to the finale, this is a notable exception in an otherwise consistent piece. Speaking of moral acts, Batman has a no-kill rule, or at least that he will not directly kill someone if he can avoid it. Yet each of the 3 Nolan films ends with one of the villains dying as a result of Batman's actions. Generally, I like a Batman who will prevent death at all cost, but I am also open to one that will kill if he sees no other option. I think Talia's death in Rises is the most justified, Raz's death in Begins is the most problematic, and this is somewhere in the middle. I think Batman could have found a way to prevent Gordon's son's death without killing Harvey. But then again, leaving Dent alive would break Gotham's spirit and allow the Joker to ultimately win. But I doubt this was on Batman's mind when he leapt at Harvey, and this was just an act of desperation. So until Batman decides to take the fall for Harvey, I'm split on whether or not this is a justified kill. I'm also puzzled by a few minor things, and if you can clear these up, I would love to hear it. First, Gordon says you can't just bury the fact that 5 people were killed, 2 of them being cops. I'm not exactly sure who Gordon is talking about or how he knows about their fates. Near as I can figure, he's talking about Wirtz, Maroney, his driver, his aide, and Ramirez. But the coin landed heads up for Ramirez, so unless she died some other way by Dent off screen, I'm led to believe that she was simply knocked out. You could make the argument that the other cop is the guy in the hospital, but A, that was the Joker and Harvey wasn't free yet, and B, weren't there 2 cops? So who's the other cop Gordon is talking about? Second, Gordon and Batman only talk about Batman taking the fall for Harvey. Why can't these acts be pinned on the Joker? It's not like the Joker can't reasonably have other operatives in the city at the time of his arrest that weren't at the Pruitt building, so he could be believably accused of orchestrating those deaths. And even if the Joker denies it, who's going to believe him over Gordon? Is there something I'm missing here? When Lau is getting burned on top of the money pile, why don't we hear anything like a muffled scream or something? It took me quite a few viewings before I caught on that the Joker was burning the money not only to prove a point, but to get rid of Lau. Everyone seems split on Batman's voice. I think it's very plausible he's using some kind of microphone when he has the cowl on. BVS even makes a point of showing it before Affleck does his voice, and I generally don't have a problem with it. However, not only was it perfectly fine in Begins, but having it even lower in this film is quite jarring because there will inevitably be lines that sound silly with that growl, such as, "This city just showed you," and "He wanted to prove." Finally, there's the point some detractors make about these characters delivering lectures more often than just talking normally. These make the players feel more like placeholders for the writers than actual people. I'll agree that there's perhaps a bit too much of that in places, but I'm also aware that this is a stylistic choice for how to deliver the material and it won't appeal to everyone. Shakespeare often used verbose and flowery monologues to get his points across, but I'm not seeing a lot of people seriously criticize him for that, and it's not like everything he wrote was a bona fide masterpiece. Nolan has proven this is the style he likes to employ with his movies, and I'm good with that. Plus, let's not forget that there is a love triangle here between 2 honorable men and an accomplished woman, and each is trying to be respectful of the other's feelings. That's very human to me. Sure, I understand people who want a less wordy film that relies a lot on visual storytelling, much like Tim Burton did with his first Batman film. But the show don't tell advice can be taken to excess, and it's hyperbolic to say every film should follow that rule. Because it's not a rule, it's a guideline. Not every film is trying to do the same thing, even if it's drawing upon the same source material. Both the 1971 version of Willy Wonka and the 2005 film from Tim Burton are looking at the same book, but they have different dramatic goals for their stories, characters, and visuals, so I find it disingenuous to say one is inherently better than the other. Same with Batman. I appreciate and even enjoy Tim Burton's original Batman, but I always felt that film had trouble communicating all of its ideas effectively, such as the dissociative identity crisis Bruce Wayne has with Batman, or how the Joker cards symbolize Jack's position within the mob in relation to Grissom. And my general film-going sensibilities lean closer to what Nolan gives us. Thus, I'm more likely to draw upon this iteration when I'm talking about for what I think makes the perfect Batman. The Dark Knight is a triumph in every sense of the word. It's incredibly intense and ponderous, but it can also be enjoyed as a summer popcorn film. Some people have criticized that it's relentlessly morose and downbeat, but I think people forget how witty the film is throughout until the third act, where the story necessarily gets grim and understandably can't have much levity. I rewatched this film in 2023 on Batman Day in a crowded cinema, and while I know this film very well, I hadn't seen it in a while, and I was struck by how often people were laughing at various quick one-liners in the Joker's jokes, such as the pencil in the eye and the hospital explosion. It has its problems, and I can understand how not everyone rallies behind it, but I think this is a film that demands respect, and for my money, earns it. Whether it's on a storytelling level with how it plays out an epic tragedy, how it maintains a balance between thoughtful character study and high-flying action flick, the thematic meat it brings to the table that got people to realize superhero films could be legitimate art alongside your gangster, war, or psychological thrillers, the technological achievements it advanced like with the IMAX format, or even for the reverence it displays for its source material by reinventing its characters without losing the roots of them, The Dark Knight has been cemented as one of the best films of the 2000s, and is arguably still the best superhero movie ever made. There are other superhero films that I adore, such as Superman the Movie, Logan, and Dr. Horrible, but I have to agree with the masses. Even if it's not the truest to how I and a lot of others see Batman, it more than validates its take and has done a lot of good. The Dark Knight is both the movie we deserved and the one we needed at that point, and I firmly believe it will continue to stand the test of time because it broke the rules in order to achieve something greater. Just after you've had 6 live-action films that have run the gambit between ultra-serious and ultra-goofy, this film comes along and proves that there's more that can be done with this outrageous idea that a man dresses up as a bat to protect a city.